We're not too sure what projects, what policies will be captured under the Special Initiatives Ministry. And so a lot of keen eyes waiting for this particular vetting, the vetting of the Honorable Emmanuel Kwadwo Agyekum as Minister of State in charge of Special Initiatives. Also, this will be the first vetting of a functional minister or a minister in charge of a specific function. We've seen vetting of minister nominees, sector minister nominees, that's ministers of state in charge of sectors. And then, of course, we've seen some vetting of ministers of state in charge of regions. This will be the first vetting of a minister of state in charge of a specific function. Okay, and so that will be the function of special initiatives. And like I said earlier, we're not too certain what the mandate or the remit of this particular ministry will be. Mind you, in the first administration of the Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo government, there was a ministry or a minister of state in charge of special initiatives who happened to be in the person of Madam Mavis Hawa Kumsen. And of course, we saw policies such as the one village, one dam, one constituency, $1 million under that the procurement of the ambulances and all was under the Special Initiatives Ministry, which was a ministry of state, but a functionary one, not necessarily a sector-specific ministry. That ministry was collapsed, however, under the second administration of Nana Akufo-Addo, and so this will be the 2000 to 2004. The first administration was between 2016 or 2017, if you like, to 2000 when we went into that general elections, and then, of course, he won again and began his second administration from 2021, I beg your pardon, to 2024. And then, of course, we've gone into another election. John Dramani Mahama and the NDC have come out victorious and have taken over the realms or the helms of affairs. Now, they have reduced the number of ministries. His Excellency the President, John Dramani Mahama, has reduced the number of ministries from 30 to 23. He promised to nominate 60 ministers within 14 days of his presidency. So far, we've seen and have indeed heard names of 42, with 18 more remaining. These 18, the suspicion largely is that will cover some deputy ministers to specific ministries. But let's zero into the vetting of today. I just sought to bring in that history so that we know that this ministry is not new. It existed under Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo's first administration, the Ministry for Special Initiatives. It's come back under John Dramani Mahama, Chapter 2. I mean, the second administration of John Mahama, and we've seen the creation of a Ministry of State in charge of special initiatives. We hopefully will get a proper understanding of the mandate of this ministry and its minister when the vetting of the minister designate begins, and that will be Emmanuel Kwadwo Agyekum. He is the member of parliament, I believe, for Nkranza South, member of parliament for Nkranza South. He has been nominated Minister of State designate in charge of special initiatives. It will be quite interesting to find out what the mandate of this ministry will be. But yesterday, we saw the vetting of the Minister Designate for Lands and Natural Resources, the Honorable Emmanuel Kofi-Boa. Quite an interesting one, an extensive one, if you ask me. It began somewhere after 9 a.m. and went all the way till about 2 p.m. thereof, almost 2 p.m. thereof. And of course, owing to the ministry that he's been assigned to or he's been nominated to serve at, a lot of questions came up covering mining in the country, the combat against illegal mining, commonly or popularly referred to as galamsey, and then, of course, land administration, the land tenure system of this country, the issue of landguardism, and, of course, what has been described within the NDC circles as a state capture of public lands. All these came up during the vetting of the Honorable Emmanuel Amakofi-Boa, and he gave his own vision or plan towards addressing some of these issues. There was also the vetting of some regional minister nominees. We saw that of the Northeast region, Ibrahim Tia. We saw that of the Ashanti region, Dr. Frank Amuakohene, a young man who has served previously as the General Secretary, not General Secretary, as the Regional Secretary for the NDC in the Ashanti region. And so he served as Ashanti Regional Secretary for the NDC. Now he's been nominated to serve as the Ashanti Regional Minister, and it is expected that upon approval he takes over the reins from Simon Osei Mensah of the NPP. There was also the vetting of the Upper East Regional Minister designate Akamugri Atanga Donatus, and quite interesting revelation that he appears to be the longest standing or the longest serving member of the National Executive Committee of the National Democratic Congress, NDC, having been a party executive since he was about 27 or 28 years old. Today, the committee is sitting, and it is expected that 5 minister nominees will appear before the committee as per the schedule communicated or published by the committee. Dr. Edward Kofi Omane Boamah, Minister Designate for the Ministry of Defense, is expected to be the first to be vetted, and per what has been announced by the minority leader, it looks like there was some miscommunication regarding the time for the vetting to begin. And so while the minority leader had earlier suggested that the committee had communicated 9 a.m. To the minister designate, the clerk to the committee, and of course Madam Joyce Bawa Mokhtari have clarified that the letter sent to the minister designate or the nominee actually says 11 a.m. and not 9 a.m. And so in that clarification has been made. Joyce Bawa Mokhtari, of course, will lead this communication, having been appointed as a special aide to His Excellency the President John Dramani Mahama. So I'll quickly run you through the nominees to be vetted today, and then we can take a break and wait for the committee to reconvene, and then we can join the feed. Like I mentioned earlier, Dr. Edward Kofi Omane Boamah, Minister Designate for Defense, is scheduled to appear before the committee first. And then the Minister of State in charge of Special Initiatives, who is the Member of Parliament for Nkranza South, Emmanuel Kwadwo Ajekum, follows. Then you have the Minister Designate for the Ministry of Works, Housing and Water Resources coming in third. Then we go into that of the minister nominees for the various regions. Today, 2 female regional minister nominees are scheduled to appear before the committee, and they are Linda Obenewa Akwele Oklu, who is representing the Greater Accra region, and then you have Charity Gardner for the Ahafu region. These individuals are scheduled to appear before the committee today. And it is important that they do show up, and then we can indeed all witness that proceedings. We are not too sure whether the vetting of the defense minister designate, Dr. Edward Omane Boamah, may actually be a public hearing due to the sensitivity or the security nature of the ministry he's being assigned to. We are waiting to see whatever decision the committee will come out with, having gone into conclave, having excused themselves from the press and, of course, the public present at the appointments committee as it is. But we are waiting to see what's the agenda for the emergency meeting, or if urgent meeting, if I can put it that way, which is being held now between leadership and members of the appointments committee is, and whether or not it has to do with the sensitivity or the sensitive nature of the defense ministry, and whether or not they should go ahead and do a public hearing of the vetting of the minister nominee. We'll wait to see. But while at it, we've also received communication of further appointments. These appointments this time go to the office of the vice president. The office of the vice president. We'll do a brief announcement of the persons who have been appointed to the office of the vice president. This letter, which of course is a communication from the presidency's communications. Recall that the information ministry has been scrapped, and then there's a minister of states designate in charge of government communications. So obviously the publication or communication of government agenda will be done from the presidency, and that is why this letter is headed presidency communications and has the emblem of the presidency there, and it's dated Tuesday, January 28, 2025, titled Appointments to the Office of the Vice President. And I read, President John Dramani Mahama has approved the appointment of the following individuals to the office of the Vice President. They are expected to bring their wealth of experience and expertise to their respective roles and contribute significantly to the resetting Ghana agenda to build the Ghana we want. I'll run by you the names of these persons. First on the list is Alex Percival Segbefia, who has been appointed Chief of Staff to the Vice President. Alex Percival Segbefia, Chief of Staff to the Vice President. Mrs. Alberta Graham, Head of Administration. Professor Theresa Enin, Presidential Staffer and Special Aide to the Vice President. Ms. Daniela Mavis Matthias, Secretary to the Vice President. Dr. Samuel Ofosu Ampofo, Policy Advisor, Political. And so he'll be a policy advisor in charge of political issues. And then you have Professor Sharif Mohammed Khalid. I beg your pardon, Professor Sharif Mahmoud Khalid, Policy Advisor, Economic. Dr. Hamza Zakaria, Policy Advisor, Economic. Ms. Mansa Amwa Ewua, Policy Advisor, Finance. Dr. Miriam Rahinatu Idrisu, Policy Advisor, Social Sector. And then there's a final one, Mamiama Pratt, as Press Secretary to the Vice President. And it's signed off by the acting spokesperson to the President, Felix Kwache Ofosu. So these are appointments that have been made to the office of the Vice President and approved by His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, the President of the Republic. Alex Segbefia, Chief of Staff. Mrs. Alberta Graham, Head of Administration. Professor Theresa Enin, Presidential Staffer and Special Aide to the Vice President. Miss Daniela Mavis Matthias, Secretary to the Vice President. And then there's the former National Chairman of the NDC, Dr. Samuel Ofosu Ampofo, Policy Advisor, Political. Professor Sharif Mahmoud Khalid, Policy Advisor, Economic. Dr. Hamza Zakaria, Policy Advisor, Economic. Ms. Mansa Amwa Ewua, Policy Advisor, Finance. And then you have Dr. Miriam Rahinatu Idrisu, Policy Advisor, Social Sector. Then there's a Press Secretary by name Mame Ama Pratt. So these are the appointments made to the office of the Vice President as approved by the President, John Dramani Mahama. We're waiting for the Appointments Committee to reconvene. Once they do, we'll go back to the committee and bring you live proceedings as covering the vetting of the minister nominees announced by the President. Quite important to note that Dr. Edward Omane Boamah, who until recently or still is actually in charge of elections and IT at the National Democratic Congress. He is the Director of Elections and IT for the National Democratic Congress, NDC, and he has been nominated to the Defense Ministry. He was scheduled to appear first before the committee. It appears as though there's been some miscommunication, and so there's been a mess up regarding the time he is expected to appear before the committee. The minority leader had earlier announced that they had received, or they had communicated to the minister nominee 9 a.m. However, it appears that the communique as sent to the minister nominee had 11 a.m. and this has been confirmed by the special aide to the president, Joyce Boamah, and the clerk to the appointments committee, and of course rehashed or made public by the minority leader, Alexander Afenyo Markin. And so we're waiting on the committee to reconvene, and then we'll know whether or not a decision has been taken on whether there's going to be a rearrangement as to who appears first or second. Mind you, the Minister of State designate in charge of special initiatives was ready, was in the house, had attended upon the invitation of the committee, was just about to be invited to take the oath when leadership decided to take that break to go into conclave and to meet and have a discussion. Which discussion, we are not sure what the agenda is. Okay, there's also the suspicion of whether, due to the sensitive nature of the defense ministry, the vetting will be public or in camera. But like I said, we're waiting to find out what decision the committee will make. All right. The host of the City Breakfast Show and Point of View here on Channel One Television, Bernard Avle, is here with me. Good morning, Bernard.
Good morning, Nana. Sorry for keeping you talking. You've done very well running commentary.
Ours is to talk.
You've done very well, yes.
If I were in the palace somewhere, I would have been a linguist.
No, you're a big man. Yeah.
Anyway, we're seeing something we've not witnessed throughout this particular appointment committee sittings. Dr. Omane Boamah, appointed or nominated for the defense ministry, was scheduled to appear first today. Yeah. Minority leader appears and announces that a 9 a.m. time was communicated to the minister nominee. However, special aide to the president, Joyce Boamah, communicated to the minority leader that indeed the communique or communication they received had 11 a.m. on it. Same was corroborated or corroborated by the clerk to the appointments committee. Yeah. And this has left some vacuum. Yeah. The minister designates in charge of special initiatives was already in the house
at 9.
Yes, and was ready to take the seat. However, leadership has gone into conclave. We're not sure what they are doing.
We were given 9 yesterday. Ni sent us the coverage of proceedings request of the Dr. Omane Boamah for 9 a.m. Emmanuel Kwejo Ejekum, MP, 11 a.m. J. Kenneth Gilbert was given 1 p.m. Linda Oklu, 3 p.m. and Charity Gardner, 5 p.m. So that's the plan we were working with. So we crossed over earlier. I think it's more administrative than anything else. And I think the point you make about the defense as well, whether it's supposed to be in camera or not, is an issue. Yeah. I think these are public hearings for a reason. Yeah. I witnessed the vetting partially of Dominic Nitso. I think there could be parts that could be done off camera, but you cannot say the whole vetting should be done off camera. Yeah. So I'm not sure that's what the delay is about. The other point is that if there's a miscommunication in time, don't forget the way the minority goes about this is that they get subject matter experts to come at specific times. Right. So if they've been given 11 and the man is there at 9, it could mean that the subject matter expert was not given 9. So they may have to clarify those because what you see from the vetting is they bring either the former minister or a specific person with knowledge in that industry to do the vetting, which I think is really nice. Yes. So yesterday, Kofi Boah was vetted for like maybe a few questions by Abu Jinapo,
the former lands minister.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's a good way to go about it, so we get a bit more rigor. So we probably just have to wait. All right. The positions being vetted today, I think the defense may be the longest. Yes. Because it's the highest consequence. The other ministry that I see there, the housing, the gentleman is not known outside the circles of those who know our politics. So it's not like that national, but people know him in Ashanti region. He was a former defense minister as well. So, and then of course the third one is a functional ministry, not a minister in a sector. So I don't expect that to take that long. Regional ministers is going to take almost an hour and a half.
Yeah.
All right. So I think this is the big one. This is the big one. So we'll see how it goes. And Omane Boamah has been very visible in the media for a long time. So there'll be a lot of people who want to question him.
Exactly.
And because he's not an MP, don't expect him to get a free pass.
Yeah.
Because usually the way they do these things, you know, when colleague MPs come, they're a bit more lenient.
They tend to shield their own.
And I think Omane Boamah will, but he will be prepared.
Yes.
He's been deputy minister before, he's been minister before, and he's been served at the highest level in the NDC. So I expect a very interesting, it will be interesting to see what he thinks about the portfolio. What he thinks about the portfolio, because I remember when Nana Akufo-Addo mentioned Dominic Nito, people were like, why Nito? Yeah. But during the vetting, you could see that because of his work in the committee in Parliament, he was quite familiar with some of the issues.
Exactly.
So Omane Boamah is a very interesting pick for defense minister, and I personally look forward to issues around the claims sometimes people make about politicization of our security agencies, and they are equipping them, making sure they are well tooled, making sure that, and for example, people question around whether our military should be involved in a Galamsey fight. I expect a lot of those kinds of things. Ghana's standing in terms of peacekeeping in the Committee of Nations and those types of things. So I think it will be an interesting vetting if it does eventually happen today. Yeah,
and then of course the president's resolve to end chieftaincy conflicts and all that. It will be interesting to see what some of his own ideas.
Because you're right, some of the conflicts they have to send military. Exactly. If you go to Boko, for example, there are detachments of soldiers in those places. Indeed, a lot of the conflicts have required us to use reinforcements of military, whether he thinks that's the way to go as well.
And the costing of keeping these military men stationed in these conflict zones and all that. Recall in the last administration or the last parliament, there were issues regarding how much was being spent on fighting these internal conflicts.
One thing I want to hear though is the use of the military for not necessarily physical defense, but for infrastructure, because they have some regiments in the military that are very efficient in building road construction. And I think if you look at where our infrastructure gap is, I hope the nominee in meeting the military hierarchy will come up with a plan to complement our efforts in buildings, because they have the 64, I think they call them, or was it 48?
48 Engineers
48
Regiment.
Engineers Regiment, who are very good at building very quickly at very lower cost, whether it's roads or houses or hospitals. To think that the Afari Hospital, the military hospital, took that long to build, I'm sure if you ask them if they could have done an alternative. So I hope we have some innovative ideas around that. And then issues around the presence at the AU Summit. We are talking about funding our own defense as a continent. So Ghana is probably the second largest contributor of troops for peacekeeping in West Africa after Nigeria. We have the Sahel group that have left. There's a conflict in DRC. I'm sure the committee would like to know from him. And by the way, our soldiers do very well when they go out. They are highly respected. And some soldiers see it also as an honor, whether it's Lebanon or wherever. So I think that's another interesting angle that will come out, whether we are still going to harness our soldiers in helping to make West Africa safer. I think that's a big issue that will come up as well.
There's also been an appointment and an envoy to the Sahelian.
Exactly.
He will not appear before this committee. So it will be interesting to know what Omane Boamah's views are on that.
Very good point. It's, by the way, the security sector has many things. You know, under the MPP, national security was a ministry. NDC never had that. And they've gone back to it's just being a secretariat headed by a policeman. So there will be questions around him, Interior Ministry, National Security Coordinator, National Security Advisor. All right, so you have the Prosper Bani is advising the president, and the DCOP Al Hassan, I think his name is, who's the head of the national security setup. How will the relation between him and say the Interior Ministry be and the Defense Ministry? From on paper, we know that Interior Ministry coordinates the security internally, and then the defense ministry protects our borders.
Yeah.
All right. How are they going to work together? What kind of collaboration would they have? Will the absence of national security ministry make things easier or not? So we hope to hear a lot more on those. And I don't think they should do those things in camera.
Right.
There may be some sensitive matters that have to be discussed. Another issue is the military's involvement in the civilian areas. Brutality.
Exactly.
Ashaiman happened. Parts of Wa happened. There have been a lot of these things that have happened where soldiers have gone to unleash revenge. And I think we started seeing this after the Major Mahama killing.
Yeah.
The soldiers were very unhappy with that. So one of the things the minister will have to do is to also enhance military-civilian relationships in a way that opens up the place for us to know what they do and for them to also appreciate where we are coming from in a democracy. There's also a question about the over-militarization of the country. So now you have some officials of state protected by soldiers instead of just police.
Yeah.
So you see, for example, the EC, there's a detachment of soldiers, and people are even complaining, why are soldiers holding the bags of public officials? I think all those things will come up in the sketch. I'll say, last thing I'll say is that I think a lot of the military people will be watching this vetting very closely. Because I was privileged to be at the Republic Day lecture at the Ghana Armed Forces Command and Staff College in Accra. And that was the first time I heard soldiers actually talk about our democracy. Francis Poku was the speaker. Kwesi Enin and a few others were on the panel. And I was the moderator. And it was so enlightening. They are very concerned about our country, about politicization, about systems working. They don't like to talk because they say by their training, they're not supposed to talk. But that day, a lot of them had a lot to say. So I really hope the nominee, in recognizing the importance of the military and our defense, not only speaks to us, but also speaks to them about the future of this democracy and why they have a role to play in keeping our democracy safe and why they have to trust the process to work. So I feel like he will be, there's a lot of people be listening to this vetting. And if we have a good nominee who does a great job, it keeps the ship of state steady. So we really hope to hear what Omane Boamah
We've seen a few of the service chiefs coming into the committee sitting now. But do you foresee events of the night of the inauguration of the 8th Parliament coming up at this vetting?
Absolutely.
The military invasion in Parliament.
I actually expected in the vetting of Dominic Nitiwu for his second term for that to come up a bit more because that was the period it happened. So I'm not too sure what this nominee can say about that except to express an opinion. But I think that will be asked within the general context of, do the military have a role when, for example, MPs are fighting? They are not, their job is not to necessarily maintain civil order unless there's a state of emergency. So generally, the police are in charge of all of this. In fact, this morning on the City Breakfast Show, we're discussing the general lawlessness in the country, where you're having supporters of parties mass up at places. People are very easy. Oh, let's call the military. People don't really understand how the military are trained. The military are trained to defend you from external aggression. So the way they sense danger is not the way you and I sense danger. Number two, the police are trained to deal with civilians. So the police know how to talk to you. They know how to contain you. The military's training is to defend the country at the peril of their lives. So when people say, oh, let's bring the soldiers in, it's not a very easy thing to say. And I hope there will be a very thorough discussion around, for example, Galamsey and the role of the military and whether that increased use of soldiers has not even diminished their stance in the eyes of ordinary Ghanaians. Because when you start exposing soldiers to corrupt bureaucrats in the mining space, and they see that wrong is not punished, they may be compromised. And there's nothing worse than giving a man a gun and bribing him on top. It's a very terrible thing to see. So I hope to hear some very clear ideas around when soldiers should be deployed and when they should not. And what protocols should be gone through before they are. And what uses should they have. People say they see that Bema can do nothing. It's good to have soldiers there as a deterrent to evil. So the fact that they don't do anything is not, they are there to protect the country. But must they be used on citizens in an internal issue? I think that point is what I expect this nominee to be very clear on. That they have their role and we can use them in ways that will enhance the republic, but not to intimidate and not to bully our way through wrong policies. So those are some of the things I'm hoping to hear from both sides during the vetting of Omane Boamah.
A number of other issues are also likely to come up, including